machine produces tranquility, it's right. If it disturbs you, it's wrong. The machine in your mind is changed. Is that in the art of motorcycle maintenance? So the official speech here is you've been served and networked and coded and deployed what it takes to serve 1 million users. But before we start, let me just tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Daniel Steen. I'm a senior systems engineer because there's no developers anymore. Everybody's an engineer. There's no admins. At Traitify.com, which is a startup. They do personality assessments, and they sell personality assessment API, programming interface, to people like Monster.com or Match.com. And those people then take it and use it to make recommendations and spiral recommendations. It's actually pretty nice. If you have a minute, take a look at it. Traitify.com. It's pretty cool. Before that, I worked for a number of different companies. I worked for companies ranging from small startups to large Fortune 500 companies. Everything from the financial sector to the hospital sector to ISPs to mobile advertising. I did some consulting work for Seth Godin, if anybody's familiar with him. So I've seen a lot of different sizes of companies and been to a lot of different places. Pardon? Oh, it's still rising. A little bit, yeah. And been through a lot of different companies, a lot of different sizes, shapes, and forms. This is some of the experience that I've picked up along the way. So you've been served and networked and coded and deployed what it takes to serve 1 million users per second. It doesn't really tell you much. I mean, it could really be talking about just about anything. You know, over 1 million served. We could be talking about this. But as it happens, we're not. And a couple other things we're not going to be talking about tonight. Sorry, here, a moment. So there's a few other things we're not going to be talking about tonight. Not in any detail, anyway. We'll touch upon a few of them. We're not going to be talking about networking. We're not going to be talking about databases. We're not going to be talking about coding. We're not going to be talking about security. We're not going to be talking about systems, except as in a very sort of peripheral way. And we're not going to be talking about IT. So, what's left? Yeah. So, actually what we are going to be talking about is everything in between all these things. There's a single thread that runs through all these that is really nothing, no part of these per se. And that is called DevOps. So, how many people in here have actually heard this term? A few. So, don't feel bad if you haven't. Actually, before 5 years ago, the term didn't exist. This is a Google search for trends on DevOps. And as you can tell, before 2010 or so, it never showed up, and it's not in Google, it doesn't exist. So, it really didn't exist before about 5 years ago. So, it's really pretty new in the scheme of things. And we're going to talk a little bit about it. So my original intention was to tell you guys, okay, well, what's DevOps? And give you a little one-liner on what DevOps is. So I thought about it a bit, and I thought, well, I don't know a one-liner to describe what DevOps is. So I looked it up, and I looked for some nice quotes, you know, what's DevOps? And I couldn't find a single quote on a single one-line concise explanation of what DevOps is. So I figured I'd have to give a longer explanation, which is fine, but before I get started in that, I figured I'd tell you why should you care? Like, who cares? DevOps, never heard of it? It's fine until now. Why should anybody care? So, to explain a little bit of that, let me tell you a little bit about a friend of mine named Scott, not his real name. So this is Scott. He is a guy I worked with at Millennium Media, the company before I worked for this one, the mobile advertising platform. He's good. He's a systems engineer. He's been doing it for I don't know, a couple of years. He's a mid-level kind of guy. And his resume is good. I know I saw his resume. I hired him. Actually, I hired him twice, but that's a different story. 2 different jobs. So his resume is good. So he decided he would leave Millennial Media, and he decided that he would try and look for a different job somewhere else. So he went and he put his resume out. And he sent it. He found 10 companies that he liked the names of, and he sent his resume out to 10 different companies. And it's cold calling, right? He didn't know anybody, he didn't have any ins or any friends, he just sent it out to 10 companies he liked the names of. So does anybody know what the average response rate on this kind of cold resume sending is? Anybody at all?
Zero.
Zero, yeah, it's about that. It's 4% is the average response rate for a standard cold call resume, what you get when you send that. Scott had a 90% response rate. He got back 9 of the 10 calls for 9 of the 10 resumes. He took interviews with 4 of them. And he got offers from 4. Wow. So it's really, really incredible. And the amazing thing is that Scott, he's good. He's not the best resume I've ever seen, but he's good. But his experience is not unique. His experience is basically consistent with anybody who does DevOps and has DevOps experience on their resume. It's pretty much consistent. So it's interesting. So the question is, what is it? Why is it so incredibly desirable? Why are people pounding doors down in order to get a hold of these people? So that's an interesting question. Well, I took a look on dice.com, standard job board, and I did a comparison. I tried to find, well, how many people are there looking for DevOps people? So there are 6,000 jobs available for people with DevOps experience. Then I was like, well, okay, so how many people are there to fill that? That doesn't sound like so many, right? 6,000. Then I saw there's only 2,000 people who even mentioned DevOps in their resume. And we all know if you put it in your resume, it means that you once heard the word mentioned. So it's not like this is so. There's only 2,000 people, and there are 6,000 jobs that are required, which means there's literally a 3-to-1 ratio. There are 3 times more jobs for this than there are for the people who can fill it, who have any experience at all, or have even heard the name. And that's rather interesting. And you think, well, okay, it's relatively new, right? People are ramping up, people want it, stuff like that. Well, you look at the trend. The trend, starting from January 11, this is the number of jobs available for DevOps from Indeed.com. And it's just going up. And the forecast is to continue. And continue as more people heard about it. You know, as we see, not everybody here has heard about it. Not everybody in the world has heard about it. As more people hear about it, everybody wants it. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about exactly why that is. But now I can actually tell you, now that you actually care, I can tell you what DevOps is. So let's get some quotes, right? So now we can pull the quotes. I'll read them, forgive me. DevOps is a response to the growing awareness that there's a disconnect between what is traditionally considered development activity and what is traditionally considered operations activity, right? So DevOps is this idea that we can organize things better, or we can line things up better. Well, let's read the next one. Agile software fixes business to dev misalignment. Has everyone heard of agile software for the most part? Agile, not agile? Okay. So agile is a software methodology. It's fine. It fixes business to dev misalignment. DevOps fixes devs to ops misalignment. So again, alignment in management and organization, right? So we get the idea. The idea is that DevOps is a methodology for reorganizing tech departments so they work better. Something like that. Okay, well, fine. Let's read some more quotes. The infrastructure moves into the code, and the people responsible for the infrastructure write the code that maintains the infrastructure. This is the movement informally known as DevOps. This was written in 2012, so it was informal. That's O'Reilly. So suddenly we're talking about code, and we're talking about infrastructure, and we're talking about people writing code. Beyond innovation delivery, DevOps provides a means for automating repetitive tasks. Well, that doesn't sound very much like an organizational methodology. So we have these 2 sets of very distinct quotes. One's talking about an organizational methodology. The other's talking about automation and coding. So what exactly is it? What is DevOps? So it turns out that this sort of dichotomy is present everywhere. If you look, this is a standard job listing for DevOps. I'm not sure you can read it. DevOps Automation Engineer. DevOps Automation Developer. DevOps Automation Engineer PowerShell. They feel the need to tell you what language you're going to DevOps in, whatever that means. So there's this, even in the job boards, even in the job descriptions, they all want DevOps and automation, and they don't know if DevOps includes automation or if it doesn't include, nobody knows. It's just kind of a thing. So we'll talk about these 2 different things. So there's 2 aspects of DevOps that we've seen. There's an automation aspect, and there's an organizational aspect. And these are really 2 distinct things, and they both make up DevOps, and that's part of why it's so hard to describe, because they're 2 completely distinct things that as a whole make up DevOps, and it sort of makes sense once you start to understand more about it. So let's talk first a little bit about DevOps as a culture, right? So I hate this term, a culture. What does that mean? It basically means how people interact in a business, right? How do you interact with people in business? So, standard development department. Anybody who's worked in the industry knows. Standard development department, the way it goes is you development, they release code, they send it to QA, I'll use my shadow, they send it to QA, and they send it to operations, and operations goes and deploys it. So code goes from development to QA to operations. And these are really heavily siloed organizations. QA is usually bundled with operations, but DevOps is really heavily, development is really heavily siloed off to a different side, someplace else. And this is really enforced by organizational structures and org charts. You can't really read it here, but the top there is CTO. The bottom here is developers, and the bottom here is operations. And basically what you have is you have two middle managers and a vice president between the developers and the operations. This is the actual org chart of a company I work for. So this is what it actually looked like. So if you, as an operations guy, and operations means setting up servers and building out OSs and databases and infrastructure and networking and all that kind of stuff. If you're one of those guys and you want to deal with a developer, your closest point of contact is the CTO. And I can tell you he doesn't care. So you really don't have a lot of connectivity, a lot of connection with it. So you say, well, okay, I mean, big deal. Ultimately, they're writing code, you're deploying code. You got to organize it somehow. So why not do it this way? So the answer is that a few things, and this is something that's become really apparent over the last 25 years, I would say, is that development and operations really, really work together. They have to work together. Because the guys who develop code can't deploy it. And they can't deploy it for a lot of reasons. One is that that's not their skill set, and the other is that they're not allowed to legally in many environments. The guys who deploy code rely on the developers to give them that code. And what you have is you have this incredible dynamic between the two, a sort of a confrontational dynamic. And anybody who's ever worked in the industry knows developers get annoyed at the ops guys. The ops guys get annoyed at the developers. The developers think, oh, listen, we're trying to release code, and the ops guys keep telling us, slow down, no, you can't release on Saturday, you can't release on Sunday, you can't release on Monday, whatever. You know, and the ops guys are like, oh man, they're throwing all this garbage over the fence at us, and none of it ever works, and this is up in the middle of the night, and why can't they just write good code? Right? And this is a standard conversation that goes on everywhere in the industry. You see this absolutely everywhere. And the truth is, this whole conversation is really endemic to this structure. It's caused by this structure, and it's caused by the incentives that this structure provides. So developers, what is their success metric? How is a developer's success defined? It's defined by how much code they've pushed. You know, you as a developer, how much code have you pushed out? What applications have you released? What have you completed? What have you written? And that's your push. So your push is constantly put more stuff out, put more stuff out. And there are bugs, you know, and that's okay. Bugs don't ding you too much within reason because everybody understands that bugs happen. So bugs don't really cause you too much of a demerit in the credit department. Then you go to operations. In operations, what's their metric for success? Their metric for success is how stable have the servers been? How solid have they been? How long have these things been up for? Not necessarily, but that kind of thing. You know, what is the last downtime we have? Do we maintain 99.99999% uptime? You know, how many nines can we get? So that's ops. And the best way to maintain stability from ops' perspective is don't change anything. It worked yesterday, it worked today, it'll work tomorrow as long as we don't touch it. And that's especially true in it's especially true when you don't have a lot of confidence in the code that's being pushed out. And the development teams, their success is the exact opposite of this. Their success is defined by, can we get this code out? And the operations team's success is defined as, well, let's release as little code as we can. Nobody says that, because that's how we're going to get that's how we're going to be successful. That's how we're going to get things to stay stable. Don't touch it. So this is really, really endemic to this sort of organizational split. And in recent years, there's been a lot of discussion about this because it's sort of come to a head, I guess. And people realize that this is kind of the wrong way to do it. You know, we could do this better. And the end result of that is an organization chart for developer and operations that looks a little more like this. There's a lot of merging going on here. So this is more of a DevOps department group division. This is how you divide it up. In a DevOps group, the development guys and the operations guys, they work much closer together. The operations guys are on the development guys' teams. They sit in on the meetings. They sit next to each other. They have constant conversation back and forth. Not only that, but the incentives have changed. It's now part of the incentive for a developer to keep his code up. And if his code goes down, well, he gets paged in the middle of the night. Suddenly he wants to write better code. It's a question of incentive. The operations guys, it's now their goal to release, to put out new products. Their metric for success is now, well, okay, have we released the following products? Have we not released the following products? Why have we slowed down the release cycle? You know, so their metric for success changes. And once you do that, the instant you change everybody's metrics for success and you change everybody's incentives, suddenly all the arguments go away. Suddenly everybody is about writing good code and keeping it running. Everybody is about releasing the code as fast as you can, as often as you can, while it's still running. You notice that we pulled QA out. QA as a department no longer exists. It actually gets automated out, largely. Not everywhere, you can't always do it, but it largely gets automated out. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But But this is what winds up happening. You wind up with a much healthier environment, an environment where everybody is sort of on the same page and everybody is trying to help each other. And it sounds all nice and good, but it really is this way. And a kind of a testament to this is just how many people want DevOps. You know, once they see it, once they hear it, once they learn about it, like, that's the greatest thing. Let's do that. But on the other hand, there's no job here. Or what's the job? What are people hiring for? You know, what's all those job listings, those 6,000 listings, the resumes you sent out? Where's the job that anybody would do here? It's just the same job everyone did. They just changed the incentives. So what is the DevOps job? You know, what is the job there? So there's the other half of DevOps. The other half of DevOps is automation. So automation is a kind of general term. What do we automate, right? So what do we automate? So we're automating a lot of things. We're automating infrastructure as code. So has anyone heard this term before, infrastructure as code? It's kind of a buzzword these days in the industry. So in the old days, if you wanted to build a box, you'd get out there and you'd go into data center, you'd rack up a box, and you'd log in, and you'd install whatever packages you want. If it was going to be a web server, you'd install Apache. If it was going to be a database server, you install MySQL or Oracle or whatever you install. Install whatever it is you're going to install. And then you make it ready, and you configure it, and you get it all done, and then you pass it off, and then you deploy the software on it, then it would be ready to go. And that was a very manual sort of process. And if you need to do 10 of these, you'd have to do them 10 times over. And the people who were good at doing this and did this a lot, read a lot of scripts. You know, you read a lot of scripts to get it done for you, because I don't want to do anything more than once. Who wants to do things more than once? So you write a script that would do it for you, fine. Then came the era of sort of gold masters. You'd have this image that you would use, and that would become your basic. That would be the base thing that you use, and you build off that. And that way you don't have to do the base install. You don't have to do all the low-level install stuff. It would come out as sort of a standard. Then the next sort of iteration of that is infrastructure as code. And this is where there is no gold master. What there is a series of scripts that are managed by a system that manages these scripts. And these scripts have a hierarchy. They inherit from each other. So you can define, this is going to be a Traitify box for a job I work for. This is a box that we use at Traitify. And it's got all the basic configuration, it adds users and all that stuff. And then you'll say, okay, well this will be a Traitify web box for this specific application. And then you write the code for that. And then you have all this code that builds boxes for you. So a box gets spun up, you point the automation tool at it, you point the infrastructure as code tool at it, and 5 minutes later you have yourself a box. End of story. It takes literally 5 minutes. We do it in Amazon, AWS. It takes us 3.5 minutes from start to finish to go from no box to a box running software and out there. So it's great. I love it. Everybody loves it. It's a great thing. You don't have to do much. You write the original automation, and it goes. So that's one thing we automate. The next thing we automate is deployments. Part of the infrastructure as a code is building the box till it's complete. That includes deploying artifacts. So we automate deployments as well, because that's just one little change. You just change which artifact you point to, or which version of software you're using, or what the config is. A tiny little bit. So that gets automated. Testing, QA gets automated. This is actually the hardest part, because this is the part that an infrastructure guy can't do by himself. You need the developers to buy in on that. And you need and it's a lot of work to get proper testing in place. And very few people ever get all the way to the end. Mostly because things get decommissioned before then. But you know, it's the average life cycle of a piece of software. But it's hard to do when people try and do it. You do it as best you can, and it's important to do. The next one is software builds. Software builds get automated, and this is kind of free because this is already automated. There's tools like Make, and there's tools like Maven, and you know, I don't know what else, Cake, and all these other tools that automatically build and software for you. So that's a great one. That's free. And the next thing we do is workflow. And workflow is kind of interesting because workflow is the automation of all this other automation. So I don't want to have to do anything more than once, as we said. So what we do is we automate absolutely everything, soup to nuts. From the moment a developer pushes up a piece of code and said, hey, this code is ready for deployment, or this code is ready for testing, really is what they say. It goes up, they push it to Git, Git's a sort of a version recording tool for code. We use it. There's lots of other tools. It doesn't have to be Git. It automatically gets built. It automatically gets set into testing. It does all the unit functional. It does the integration tests and the load tests. And the integration tests are neat because they require environments. That's what the integration testing is all about, is testing in the environment. So what we do is we have all this infrastructure as code. We spin up an entire environment. So during the integration test, we spin up an entire environment for each application that needs it. That's a database, everything under the sun. It all gets spun up in virtual machines because we're not doing load testing there. And then it all gets torn down when that's done. It takes a few minutes, and load testing. If that all succeeds, we don't do load testing for everything, only things that need it. So it takes about 20 minutes without load testing. So you know, from the moment the developer pushes up code till the moment he finds out if it failed is about 20 minutes, which is great. If it succeeds, it gets deployed. Right now, because testing is incomplete, right now you can put in a push button deploy. It says, hey, it's ready for deploy, and they take a quick look at it and you say, okay, go. So it's a two-step deploy. But either way, it's better than what it used to be, because what this used to be was a major event, right? What was a deployment? The deployment was a major event. You did one every 6 months, and you deployed, and you got everybody on hand, you got all the developers in, and you got the QA guys, and they spent the last week testing it, or 2 weeks testing it, or whatever it is, and then you got the systems guys out there, and they were going to do the deploy, and sometimes it would go right, sometimes it would go wrong, and it would take hours, and now it's 20 minutes, start to finish. So, sorry, go ahead.
How many deployments a day do you do?
So that's a good question, actually. I was going to mention it. What this has gone from deployment every 6 months to people like Google, I just read, do 1,000 deployments a day. So I'm not going there. That's a different scale. My company, which is about 15 programmers in maybe 15 applications. Some of them do require 1 million users a second. We do about 4 to 10 deployments a day, which is good.
Yeah. Do you do that on every branch, or do you only specify only specific branches, and that's?
Yeah. So the specific way we do it is we have a regression branch, and we have a load testing branch. And if you push the regression branch, you say, hey, this is ready to go. Push the load testing branch, goes to load testing.
So each developer still has their own smaller development
so
type
developer,
environment.
yeah, so they always have a master branch, and we never touch their master branch because everybody likes their master branch. So we can go into more specific details exactly. That's pretty much how it's done. Okay, so where we go? So this is deployments. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I have to ask this question. Security testing doesn't show up here.
Yes.
And that makes me antsy.
Everything is secure to start with. No, this is not a full schematic. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't show up here.
Okay.
The exact communication back and forth and things like that. Security auditing. We don't need to security audit our internal tools 100% because they're all locked down behind a bunch of layers. The API does get security audited.
Okay.
And we have external security audits that go on and things like that. Yeah, I know, right? I didn't want to leave it all.
You got it before I asked it.
Okay.
Your external security audits are also automated?
So when we don't do an external security audit every day, what they do is they have services that go out and pull them. They pull your thing. They do every 24-hour security audit, once a week security audit, whatever it is. They have these various different things. So it's not built into so that aspect of it is not built into the process because it happens on a separate schedule, which is fine. Mostly because we can't trigger it. They don't provide that. So easily. So you have to sort of work with the tools you're providing. But some people do. Eventually they all will. So that'll be good. So that's the two halves of DevOps. And this kind of question is how did this happen? You can't give a description on one liner what is DevOps. And I bet you still can't give a description of what is DevOps, given that it's these two things, which are unrelated, and you have to sort of explain the relation. So how did it happen? It's the sort of organizational stuff and the sort of automation stuff. So I believe that what happened is that DevOps and the automation aspect of DevOps is operations reacting to their new responsibilities. So operations whose desire is to keep things stable, and their initial reaction is don't release, because when we touch things, it becomes unstable. They now are responsible to release. Their success is now dependent on releasing, and on releasing often, 10 times a day, 1,000 times a day. For a 15 developer company, 10 times a day is significant. Whenever they're done, they push up code. It goes out. That's kind of how it goes. So I think this is a reaction to that. I think this is a reaction to trying to maintain that stability. So how can we maintain stability in the face of constantly updating software? So what you do is you build a framework, and inside that framework, everything is kept rigid. And there's just a tiny few moving parts, and that could be a config file, or it could be an artifact. And if nothing else changes, then you maintain stability despite the constant updates. And I think so. My belief is that that's how this happened. That and the fact that it's just sort of the next natural iteration of where it was going. Everybody was scripting stuff anyway. Everybody was doing this kind of thing anyway. So this is just sort of the natural evolution of where it was going to go.
How much of this is predicated on web services, deploying web apps?
So that's an interesting question. The company I work for does web app, but we also have an iPhone app and things like that. You don't have to have a web app. What you do have to have is an app that pulls for updates. If your app just sits out there and is on a buoy somewhere in the middle of the water, and some guy comes out every 6 months to it to do an update, you're not going to be able to do something like this so easily. Although you can build systems that work that way, but again, it's much more difficult. So there are certain prerequisites. One of the prerequisites is that these apps can check in periodically for updates, things like that. But it doesn't require it, absolutely. That answer the question?
I mean, there's like a fundamental,
Why would you think web services should be the underpinnings to this?
I mean, back when you were deploying a new accounting app on an IBM mainframe, you know, it is a big shift every 6 months to deploy a new version, but it's not like there's this fast reaction time development, et cetera.
Only because you don't have it. You could. There's no reason it has to be a big shift every 6 months. Why couldn't that bug fix that just fixes the problem with rounding errors go out yesterday or tomorrow? It's very little change. And everything else
Well,
is
how
not the
does
same.
that? I mean,
I'm just saying, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't even have to be a major patching. You know, that's the whole point of all this, is you're changing this whole outlook, which existed for a long period of time for very good reason. You know, the tools didn't exist to do a lot of this 10 years ago. So a lot of what
I
we're doing
was
is
doing
based
this
on
26 years ago.
which part?
This stuff.
Well,
Well,
nothing with web services though.
It was a web server.
It was a web service, it was a web service.
it's fantastic. If you were here 20 years ago, you're ahead of the curve. You shouldn't have been
Just-
We're dead.
I thought you were
That's
gonna say
great.
that you could do 25 years ago pushing
That's
software.
fantastic.
Well,
See,
they
Dan, I
push
actually have the
software
opposite
installation.
question. Do you have like, it's a web app, right? So to me, that direct push like that, does that mean they have like Selenium built in or some kind of a actual good, because
So
you
we're not
could do
actually
a lot of good stuff with a unit test,
Yes.
but there's gonna be a limit where if you live deploying that many times a day,
Right. Well, so the other thing I said is we do a 2-button approach to deployment.
I do what?
A 2-button deployment. And that's where somebody eyeballs it just to make sure that the color can go green or something. You know, who knows? But it's a quick eyeball. The other thing is you can do Selenium. There's no reason not to. We don't have Selenium built in because our primary thing is not a web app. Our primary thing is an API. So for us, it's very easy to do these tests against an API. But absolutely, people do Selenium. I know companies that do Selenium. Google is by all means. Google does this. Facebook does this.
What's Selenium?
Selenium is a
It's basically be able to test your web interface, your web application interface without actually a user sitting there clicking.
Yeah.
So you can automate
It
that.
simulates clicks.
And you can-
Are you using SOAP UI?
Is
that
It's
it?
a difference.
Is
Are
that
you
a
using
transaction?
SOAP UI for testing?
No, which
We
aspect?
have done, we've
So
done
you
very,
might-
very
great tool for
extensive
web
development. We use lots of JSON.
whoever asked the question. And I can talk about it a little bit more.
Alright, so anyway, so that's my theory on how this stuff got together. I haven't heard that anybody actually knows why they're together, just everybody seems to want to love it. It works pretty well for me.
They've been pushing software out in huge volumes for decades already.
Oh yeah.
So it's not just that.
Yes, okay, yeah.
You have to find then what's the differentiation. I haven't heard yet what it is.
All I can tell you is that.
I was not gonna say it's a cool term. so
No,
therefore-
as much as it's a cool term. Perhaps it's that everybody now wants to do that. Whereas before it was only the big shops that wanted to do it.
It's a priority now.
It could be that as well. It's also the relationship between the people involved, you know, to remove the contention. And that's why the restructuring bit is actually really important. It actually is a really important part of what goes on. And much as I hate the term culture, it really is exactly what it is. You know, it's how do you interact.
Well, I think also the fact that Agile became such a part of
Yeah.
software development now, and Agile basically pushes you to release often.
Yes, that could very well be.
You literally, and then once you do that, you know, if you go to any kind of Agile class or Scrum, whatever, the first thing they'll tell you is that if you're not going to automate this stuff, you're never going to be able to do this.
Right. So this could very well be a reaction to all that. Very possible, very possible. Okay, so next question is, why is this so hard to find, right? So we
Because you
saw
guys,
that
I
there.
thought that we were gonna continue on that thread. Where, these development guys and op guys, what's the DevOps guy?
So the DevOps guy is, so that's actually a really good question, and that's actually what we're talking about.
Oh, okay, fine.
So that works really well. So who is the DevOps guy? What is the DevOps? And why is this so hard to find? So clearly, there's 6,000 jobs, 2,000 people. Everyone's looking. If you put it on your resume, you will be badgered out. I mean, I really mean it. If you write it on your resume, upload it to LinkedIn, you'll get, I don't know, 5 emails a day for people looking.
But not necessarily for the type of job that you
No,
want.
utterly different, completely different. Sometimes I've been offered, you know, Windows web things. I'm a Linux guy, so I do offer Windows. You know, it's just, I'm like, have you looked at my resume? But you will. You'll get a lot of them that are actually somewhat relevant. So why is this so hard to find? Well, so you have to look at what's the requirements. What do people want out of these DevOps people? You know, they want a few things. They want expertise with infrastructure. They want you to be able to write and maintain code. And it's not a given that because you can do one, you can do the other. Infrastructure guys do not necessarily, and very often do not make good coders. And coders can't stand infrastructure, by and large. Some people like it. Most coders really can't stand infrastructure, and they just don't want anything to do with it. They're perfectly capable of building boxes, they just don't want to.
Pays less.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
How do these jobs compare in salary to
The
a senior software
average-
developer versus senior DevOps?
So the average starting salary of a DevOps guy, because there aren't any starting DevOps guys, you start kind of in the middle and go up. Average starting salary is about 130, and it goes up to 200. So it's about up there with the top layer programming positions as well. So it's very similar, and there's reasons for that. Because they want you to write a lot of code. So it's very similar. They also want you to be able to interact with many different groups and address their needs. And it's a funny kind of thing, but that's really what you're doing. You're sitting in on the scrums with the developers. You're talking to them. You're getting their needs. You're trying to automate their stuff. So you need to talk to them, figure out what their stuff is. So there's two places these people come from. So that would ask. There's two places where these people come from. Who are they? So you can either come from a developer and decide that, well, as a developer, you want to be a DevOps guy. In which case, most developers don't have expertise in infrastructure. They just don't. They don't want it. They don't like it. They don't want anything to do with it. So there are a few who do, but again, it's not most. So that already takes some. They could come from the system side. They could be the Linux guys of the world, the Unix guys, the networking guys. The problem is that many people who do infrastructure really can't write code very well, and they really don't. And the people who can, the really good infrastructure guys who can write code, they tend to have a problem with the third one. And it sounds funny, but it's true. There's a reason that this is the stereotype. Systems guy. It's not an accident. And the truth is, it's not so much like that anymore. A lot of ways because of this, but the fact is, it is still a stereotype, and it does impact the number of people who are capable of doing these jobs. So it sounds funny, but it really is true.
So you're saying good communication skills is very helpful?
I'm saying good communication skills is very helpful. Yes, absolutely. Not just helpful, but guys like this nobody wants anymore. They want people who can talk to you and tell you what's going on.
The middle bullet point, writing code, I imagine it's generally shell scripting.
A lot of it's Ruby.
A lot of it is Ruby on
Yep.
Rails.
A lot of it's Ruby, some of it's Python. So Ruby, Python are the big tools these days. It's moved away from Perl. In the old days, it was all shell script. I love shell script. But anyway, in the old days, it was all shell script. These days, it's a lot of Ruby and Python. Plus deploy code, so you got to mess with Java. And you have to mess with, everything else under the sun.
Why has it moved to Python and Ruby away from shell scripts and Perl?
It has. Why has it?
Yeah.
Perl kind of went out of fashion.
Because of Python.
What's that?
Because of Python.
Because
No, because you couldn't read your code after you wrote it.
It was hard. It's hard to deal with Perl. And also, the styles of programming have moved on, and Perl had all that packed on, but it wasn't designed that way. Right? Shell script is great. Everybody shell scripts. It's fantastic. But there's a limit to what you can do. There's a limit to what you should do with shell scripts. You can do anything. It's just a bad idea at some point.
You need to maintain it.
I'm sorry?
You need to be able to
You
maintain
need to
it.
be able to maintain it. When your shell script gets about this long, it might be time to find another language. Also, it's hard to operate with in some complex, data architecture and things. You might be doing a lot of weird stuff to get it to work. Anyway, so sounds great. How can I get it? Takeaways. If you're a developer, this is from a developer perspective, because most people out there, most people who interact with the developers, learn a bit about infrastructure. Linux, AWS, these are great skills. They're good things to learn. I mean Linux really specifically because in the terms of who's doing this with Linux and who's doing this with Windows, Linux is orders of magnitude more. You're not going to find, there are no Facebooks of the world running on Windows. They just don't. Whatever the reason is, they do. Learn the tools. There's a bunch of tools that people use for this. The automation tools, Chef and Puppet, Jenkins, Docker, Sol, Ansible. It just goes, the list goes on and on. You pick one and start learning. It doesn't really matter which one. They're all in use.
What is AWS?
Sorry, Amazon Web Services. So Amazon Web Services is Amazon's. It's kind of a neat story behind that. If anyone's interested, I can tell it afterwards. But it's Amazon's. They allow you to rent space on their servers because they have really big servers, and you can do it in a dynamic fashion, spin things up, spin things down. You pay by the hour, so you can spin up 1 million servers for an hour. It costs you a bit, but they nickel and dime. Yeah.
Do you see? It's funny that you didn't mention Google's competition there with their servers. Do you see any trending going on with using Google's computational engine?
They're trying. Google is trying. My impression is looking at the jobs that people want and the skills that I meet people who have at the conferences and things like that. My impression is that there's interest. People are interested in it. But Amazon has such an incredible array of services that everyone's using already. That just it's hard to get away from the momentum.
He's not a Google fan, so.
There you go. Learn to make things work. Compromise, communication. This is really a big deal. If you can talk to people and you can compromise with them, because everybody has conflicting requirements, everybody has conflicting desires. I want one thing, he wants another thing. Ultimately, we both got to get this product out. So let's compromise. Let me do that and keep learning. It's a moving target. It's not. You can't sit down, learn one thing, and say, "Oh, I'm done. I know it all." Basically, what I do every day is I learn something that I didn't know before, because that's what I'm doing. I have to find some new solution. If I already knew the solution, it would be done already. So I have to find some new solution to something I didn't know how to solve before. So it's a constant stream, constant thing. So, how to serve 1 million users a second? So there are 3 ways to serve 1 million users a second. You can do the stability method in the traditional organizational, which is the way we talked about, where everything stays stable. Releases are very few and far between as much as you possibly can. You want everything to stay as stable as possible. These are the financial institutions of the world. To some degree, these are the hospitals. They try and stay stable.
Government.
I'm sorry?
Government.
Government. Well, that's not on purpose. But or you can do the innovation method, where stability, it's okay, and you just move on and release new products. And it sounds like a funny way to do it, but I actually do know companies who do this. They write some of the worst software I've ever seen, but they're big, big companies.
You mean like Oracle?
No, well, I don't know. But they own 2-digit domain names, 2-character domain names, just to give you a sense of how big they are. But they really do this, and it's terrible. Or you can do the DevOps methodology, which incorporates everything, does everything, and allows you to do both. Rapid release all the time. It's actually pretty good. And there you go. Any questions?
Could you go back to 3 slides now?
3 slides. You want to see Nedley again?
No. One more forward.
Forward.
To the tools and AWS and stuff.
Yeah.
What about network-specific things like Cisco routers versus software-defined networks?
So that's a very interesting question. By and large, the real networking happens below this level. Meaning, the guys who are involved in DevOps are more the systems guys. And they're not mucking around with the networks and things like that. Very valuable skills, absolutely valuable skills. But that's happening a layer below where DevOps is happening. I'd love to see it.
Application firewalls handled at this level, or
No,
that's?
same thing, firewalls, all that stuff, a layer lower.
When
And
you
I'd
say
love to see it
valuable,
move
do you
in there.
mean important or do you mean valuable?
I mean, it depends on how many Cisco certifications you have valuable, but it's very important. They're good things to know. All these skills are things that, especially if you're looking for a small company, you're going to wind up using, and you're going to wind up needing to know, because someone's going to want some weird configuration that requires large, packets or something like that. Or you're going to have to adjust the MTU of something because your application is not optimal because it keeps dividing. You're going to have to know this stuff. So knowing that is very, very useful.
Where does the term solutions engineer or solutions provider come in? Is that equivalent to DevOps?
I don't know. Considering I can't tell you what they mean on that list of job things by DevOps engineer or whatever. You have to read the specific thing. The whole field is in such flux that they could really mean anything. They could literally mean anything.
A million different buzzwords.
Yeah, it could literally mean anything. Anything else? Yes, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, from the security standpoint, you're probably very aware of cloud providers like Imperva and others. So I could totally see, automated configuration scripts, kind of populate.
Yeah. If someone knows a neat security auditing tool with hooks and API hooks, let me know.
Yeah, there's cloud-based solutions right now that do all the, OS top 10 kind of.
I mean, there's static code analysis tools too that, you could just.
Yeah.
Fortify.
Yeah.
SonarQube.
Yeah.
And there's others.
So before DevOps was a term, a concept, how did you become a DevOps guy before it was a thing?
So that's an interesting question, me personally. So I kind of fell into it. I've been doing Linux for a long, long time. 1998, I started doing Linux. It's pretty close to when it was invented, give or take a few years. I know it's not that long to some people.
When you said doing, you mean as administrator?
I mean as administrator, yeah. And you write some code on it, and you try and get your, various ways of dealing with it. And then that sort of rolled into a job, and I started doing that. And then I started working for a startup that had just gone public. and they wanted, the way I personally did it is they wanted a DevOps guy, because the term had just come out and everybody was excited about it. So I was like, okay, I can do that. And that was how I got started with it. You basically just start going to meetings with people who you've never been in meetings with before, because you were buried in the basement doing systems. No, so you go to meetings and you wind up in programming meetings, and you prove that you can actually communicate in some effective fashion. And that's how I sort of got into it. It's not a standard track, because most people don't do systems for a living. Most people don't start off in systems. Most people go to college and they get a degree in programming or something like that. So most people are coming from the other direction.
Meaning from development.
From the development direction. But it doesn't have to be that way, and if you do come from the development direction, it's not a big deal that you don't know everything about systems, because they're systems guys. Just because you're not the systems guy, you're working with the systems guys as a DevOps guy. It's not a, I work with developers as a DevOps guy.
So you learn on the job.
That's how it always is. You're constantly learning on the job.
So then that's another question, so what is the DevOps?
So is it only gonna be DevOps guys that have more of a concentration in development, and DevOps guy who have more of a concentration in the ops part? Or is there still gonna be that unique development and operations guy? Meaning, how merged is that Venn diagram gonna get?
Right, so that's a really good question.
Can I offer something on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I really think that there's, you said it, but you haven't said it, and that is that more to the point is gonna be the system administrator who can step in and talk code, talk development, and understand their needs and can relate to them. You don't have to be a coder per se, but you probably will be, because being a system administrator properly on a Linux system, you're gonna end up having to write some variation of shell scripts or whatever it may be. And that's gonna get you into conversation that's meaningful, provided, you're willing to keep your ears and mind open, say, how can I help you?
Yeah,
How can I make
absolutely.
you successful?
And that's really an important question. How can I help you?
But
That's
I
what it
really,
comes down
no,
to.
seriously.
No, no,
I
I
really
mean,
think it's gonna come from, more often from the system administrators who are willing to stretch.
So the opposite. It's funny because in my experience, I see just the opposite. Because it's usually, for the few project I could think of, is this type of automation started from the fact that developers I can't take doing this manual anymore. So therefore, I've done some of that stuff, not to this level, but to where, we're in the point where I kind of, let go is where, okay, I need somebody, the system guy, who's also usually sitting there in a corner doing stuff with our custom cloud stuff. It's like, okay, I want you to come in here and, write me a script that automates this. Because about this stuff. I know, but usually what happens is developer, at least what I've seen, is the developer is the one who's saying, okay, I'm going to automate all this because I need to keep deploying it and I just can't do this anymore.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. Everybody wants it. And that's why everybody wants it, because everybody wants it. But to your point is a question of at what point do you become really both? I think that's actually a pitfall to the whole thing. Being both is too hard. You can't be both a developer and an ops guy in earnest, because they're two different types of jobs. Ops is an interrupt-driven job. You have projects, but there's constantly stuff going on that you have to handle and deal with. Development is a schedule-driven job. You've got a schedule. So if you're really trying to do both, very hard to balance. I think it really is a pitfall.
So when a company's looking for a DevOps guy, do they know if they need more dev or more ops?
They usually do, and it usually depends on the guy who's writing the job description.
So is there a tool that's kind of out of the box? I'll pick a scenario. Let's say out of the box that you know of. They're not going to be 100%, but does fairly well. Something like automating your APIs and automating your testing your APIs, run everything. Already hooks into your continuous integration server and deploys. Is there a tool that you like? Let's say, for example.
Do you mean that they'll do it all, or that
Yeah,
you can
pretty much will do it all. There's always hooks to it, but
yeah, there's nothing that does it out of the box, because what you're doing is really customized per infrastructure and application basis. But there are tools like Jenkins. I happen to really like Jenkins.
But that's just a continuous integration stuff. I mean, have you tried
Does
using
it all.
Atlassian
It really
tools?
does do it all. Sorry, what?
It's true if you start automating. I'm saying totally out of the box, without having.
There's nothing really.
Have you tried Atlassian Bamboo tools?
So Atlassian, Bamboo, and Jenkins, I sort of equate.
Oh, I see.
Bamboo likes to help you a lot, especially with Java stuff. But the moment your stuff's not Java,
No, it does.
it does other stuff, but it's not as good. Bamboo is really heavily. My impression of Bamboo is really heavy. They used it at one of my previous positions. You still got to write a lot of stuff. You still
Yeah,
have
it was
to
a
write
previous
lot.
version. They really rewrote
Have they
Jira
really?
and Bamboo from scratch.
Really? Oh, it might be worth looking into.
Yeah, because they went all agile. They actually talk to you about now how they deploy once a week. They deploy the entire, and for themselves, they deploy, I think, every day or something like
That's
that.
really cool, that's really, I'd love to see it. Again, my feeling is that a lot of this stuff is really custom at this point. Until people start writing code for this, it's gonna stay that way. But if they have it, people can achieve all kinds of stuff, so yeah.